Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And for those of you that are watching by way of live stream, we welcome you to Christ Church and to the Faith Forum. I'd like to begin with a prayer. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
God our Father, you see your children growing up in an unsteady and confusing world. Show them that your ways give more life than the ways of the world, and that following you is better than chasing after selfish goals. Help them to take failure not as a measure of their worth, but as a chance for a new start. Give them strength to hold their faith in you and to keep alive their joy in your creation through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. I heard someone say the other day that this must be the most difficult time ever to be a parent. If that's the case, just try and imagine what it's like to be a teenager or a young adult. It's unbelievable, really, if you think about the number of messages that our kids receive and about what it means to be cool or to be accepted by their peers, alongside what's often the overwhelming pressure to succeed academically and athletically, compounded by all the disruptive and disturbing things that are happening in our society. Too many teenagers feel overwhelmed, and most parents feel ill-equipped to even know where to start to address the things of the soul and overall well-being. How do we raise soulful, courageous kids in a culture of fear and pressure, where there are so many things that are both real and virtual that are competing for their attention? Today, it's an honor to welcome Tad and Elizabeth Roach from St. Andrew's School in Delaware. For nearly 40 years, they have dedicated their lives to teaching and mentoring students while simultaneously coaching and guiding parents through some of the most important moments of life. Tad is the Merrill M. Stenbeck Head of School, and Elizabeth is the Dean of Teaching and Learning and the Stewart Chair of the English Department, as well as the Director of the Women's Network and the College Network. They are a beacon of light and a treasure of wisdom, and it's an honor to welcome Tad back and Elizabeth for the first time to the Faith Forum. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank
you. Over almost 40 years of teaching and mentoring, living through all kinds of different seasons of life with kids and seasons in the life of our nation, I can only imagine all the things that you've seen. But what's particularly unique about this moment? What are young people saying to you about what it means to live in this particular moment?
So first of all, we're really very proud to be back here in Charlotte and very proud to be in this incredible community. And thank all of you for joining us this morning. The answer to Chip's question, at least for me, is a bit paradoxical. I'm a gigantic believer in this particular generation of students that we're educating and that are a part of the United States and the world right now. They're idealistic and responsible and thoughtful and creative and amazingly generous. They have come of age at a time when issues of race and gender and religious intolerance and attitudes towards sexual orientation have all opened up in this powerful way. They live in elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools that have the potential to be the most human and compassionate and accepting high schools, schools, colleges in the history of our country. And this generation is very earnest in approaching the issues that they see going on in the adult world. So I think what's so interesting to me is that those aspects of life in the world and in the country that Chip mentioned, which are sending messages of anxiety and polarization and disparity and despair, are actually not necessarily wedded to the adolescent or middle school or elementary experience unless we as adults decide that that's what we're going to do with their experience. So our argument actually is that if this is incredibly powerful generation of courage and idealism and innocence, why wouldn't we protect that? And why wouldn't we give them really good work to do in schools and in the society and in the country? And why wouldn't they become the architects for a new America and a new global order? That's really the energy that's going on in the country right now. It doesn't make the headlines. It doesn't sell newspapers, but it's actually what's going on in schools all across the country. Absolutely amazing kids hoping to be given the chance to remain idealistic and responsible. And quite frankly, I think sometimes we mess that up. And we turn them into the adults that they don't really want to be. And so I think that's part of what we're trying to do in the world of education is to rescue childhood and adolescence and to give them the idealism and generosity of spirit that will allow them to be the citizens that they know they can become.
Elizabeth, when you perceive that there's a family that is coming to St. Andrews to drop their kid off, and what they're really interested in is not this idealism that Tad's talking about, but that they really just want their kids to be successful. Mm. And what they really hope is that they're going to come and do all the things that they need to do so that they can get the grades that they need to get so that they can go and get into college. How do you have a conversation with a parent about what really is a very different approach that you all have, which is arguably countercultural? Mm-hmm. If that approach is the cultural mentality of sort of the upper middle class, then what do you say?
So I want to thank you also for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here. It's a great question. I think we see this all the time. We see parents asking about our academic program, the rigor of it, and how we do prepare our students to be successful. I always challenge the notion of what success is and what that means, because for us, success is not about what college they go to. That is part of the journey, but there's so much more that we are doing with our students, and so much more that gives meaning to their lives. And I believe so ardently in the power of the classroom. I'm a teacher, but I believe that those spaces are transformational spaces. And I think as teachers, we need to be teaching our students the skills and giving them the tools to navigate this very complex world that you were describing. And so much of those skills are really rooted in the kind of scholars they become, what kind of thinkers they are, how they engage in learning. And if we can get students to fall in love with learning, to ignite those intellectual passions, they're going to have the skills and the tools they need to move through the world and to negotiate all of those complexities. So I feel as if in order to do that, they can't be strategic learners. They can't be rote learners. We can't be asking them to just regurgitate what we're telling them. We can't just teach to the test all the time. We need to engage them in very rigorous thinking, but also thinking that is collaborative, which I think is essential in this world. They need to know that they have the ability to become better thinkers in collaboration with other students and with adults as well. And to do that, you have to really take that classroom space and make it a place where they can take risks in their thinking and take intellectual risks and be open to disagreement and debate. And that requires a kind of generosity of spirit and mind. It requires really active listening. It requires a flexibility in the way that they think so that it's okay to change how they're thinking, to refine how they're thinking, and to continue to sharpen their minds. And when they engage in that kind of learning, it's very exciting for them. It's hard, but it's also incredibly inspirational, and they want to do more of it. So there's a great joy in that kind of thinking and that kind of learning. And what happens is they take that outside the classroom. They want to continue to have those kinds of conversations. They want to have those discussions. They want to have that kind of meaningful relationship with their peers and with their teachers. And if you can get that to happen so that they're doing it beyond the classroom, then they're going to take that through their lives in the way that they approach problems they face, in the way that they face adversity, because they know how to think, they know how to be open, they know what the terms are in terms of evidence and argumentation, and they will be able to become more nuanced, more sophisticated thinkers and listeners and human beings. And truth comes from that, advancing truth and understanding the world around us. So this is a very long answer to your question, but I think that parents want, essentially I really believe parents want their children to be happy and to live meaningful lives. And that's not going to happen if everything they do is strategic and simply a path towards that kind of success. They need to be fulfilled. They need to be passionate about ideas and books and humanity around them. So I try to communicate that. I think if they see it in our students, if they visit a class, they see it's a very different kind of classroom. And I think they see it in our alums beyond St. Andrews. And I have to say that for me, the alums, and I love seeing a couple in the room here, they come back and inspire me to continue to do this work because they're leading really extraordinary, successful lives.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting to hear you use the word collaboration rather than competition. So I think that one of the cultural concept is, let's get into an argument and around in the classroom or around the kitchen table or in the car, the purpose is to win. And so this idea of teaching what it means to collaborate is quite an important value for this day and age.
That kind of competitive culture only leads to rigid thinking and closed-mindedness. Mm-hmm. If you're going to dig in, so much of the work we do as teachers at St. Andrews is to actually completely explode that whole notion of competition. It's very freeing for the students not to be in competition with their peers. It's very freeing for them to actually know that their peers can make them better thinkers, and that working together they actually are able to build and refine an argument that is much better, or a reading of a book, or solving a problem, whatever it is. And again, it's the competition and the sort of the notion of success, if you're always in opposition to somebody else, is not a way to find meaning in your life. So they actually build authentic and meaningful relationships with each other, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. So that those conversations, they want to keep talking about those things because they're really interested and they're not in competition with those around them. So it's freeing for kids.
That goes to something I want to ask you, Ted, about, which is this idea of grace and kindness. Again, these almost seem like soft, unrealistic things in this day and age. How do we as parents, and I think what's wonderful about this conversation is this is really a conversation about what we can do as parents wherever we're in school. What does it mean to, and how do you, in a world, in a culture that's really almost stripped of grace, how do you talk about grace in a way that where it has substance and can potentially take hold in the life of a kid, a family?
So I think one of the things we try to look at is when we see the outside world, and if we see this hyper competition, and if we see this hyper individualism, and if we see this incredibly polarized and angry and even violent expression, the opposite of this violence and intolerance and impatience and cynicism is grace. It's the notion that human communities in the 21st century should have learned very well by now that collaboration and conversation and compromise and reconciliation and listening are the core of our democratic ideal, and that the diminution of grace leads to the diminution of truth, which leads to the diminution of civility and even order in our society. So just as you as families are establishing these powerful family values of generosity of spirit and grace and sacrifice for one another that embodies the family, the school or the democracy should be embodying this sense that we are not in a zero-sum game. We're not in a winner-take-all proposition. We're trying to create a culture in a school, in a country, in a world that is going to be sustainable and is going to take all of the incredible innovations and discoveries and moments of enlightenment that have characterized the human story, and we're going to put them to work. We're not going to go backwards. And so grace in a school means the grace that adults give to students, the love and affirmation and belief and support that every student receives. And in a school, it means that students of all ages give one another grace and one another empathy and one another care and one another concern. And in a school, it allows students to tell their own stories and their own narratives of their families or their backgrounds or their interests. And it seems to me this shouldn't be countercultural at this point. We shouldn't have to make a case for a culture of collaboration, a culture of generosity, or a culture of faith in one another. And my other argument is that the narrative of all of you in this room, in your own professional lives, you know that these values are alive and well in the lives you're living in Charlotte, and the lives you're living in this church and in your communities. And so why the element of grace has been totally absent when it's actually present everywhere in our country, I'm very baffled by it. But I think it's very dangerous when students believe that those kinds of qualities no longer exist. So at St. Andrews, we tell a lot of stories about what's happening in the world and what's happening in the country, and we're not telling the bad stories. We're talking about the men and women in all the communities in this country and the world who are making a discernible and powerful and transformational difference, because they're out there, and these stories are there everywhere in this city and in our state and in this country and in this world. But we seem to be paralyzed by these loud and increasingly intolerant voices. And I got a little taste of it. I watched a little Charlotte TV last night and saw a couple of your TV ads. There's not a lot of grace there.
I'd also add that grace allows our students to make mistakes and fail and learn from that. And I think that's the other really important aspect of a learning process is to be able to make a mistake and understand what happened and think through it and keep moving ahead. And I think it pairs with your initial question about this notion of success. And unfortunately, a lot of the colleges are putting that pressure on students now where they're looking at freshman grades carefully, and there's just so little room for young people to explore and experiment and take risks and to, not do well. The margin is so thin, and so grace is really fundamental to how we educate our students. We need to allow them to have moments where they're not perfect, and that culture of perfectionism, which just gives so much stress in their lives. And we're trying to reduce that stress. That doesn't mean you reduce the rigor of what you're teaching them or how you want them to think. In fact, it's a more rigorous kind of thinking, I think, but it's one that gives joy instead of stress.
Well, I think we really do struggle with failure. And as a result of that, we hyper-engineer our families and our kids to make sure that they don't have any failure. And what I sort of wonder about is that may be good and great to sort of get into college. But it seems to me that if we begin to sort of engineer our kids' lives, when does it ever stop? And what's the emotional toll if a kid is taught that they can't fail in high school, they can't fail in college, they can't fail when they get their first job? When does it ever stop? And what are the long-term consequences, of not having any grace in your life?
So I think two things. One, you're right. We're not allowing them to fail, but we're also at the same time, and they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves to be perfect, and the adults are doing that to them. And as a result, parents often are trying to protect their children and keep everything safe, and so that there isn't any room for experimentation, risks, failure. And so one of the books we've been reading recently is The Coddling of the American Mind, is that what it's called, by Richard Haight, where it basically is making that argument that we are, keeping our children and our young adults in this kind of bubble where we're protecting them against everything, and they don't know how to deal with adversity and complexity, and they get into the adult world and adult jobs, and they don't know how, and so that's in the mix too. So I think that's one thing that we're working against as well, that we need to continue to work against, is not just creating a kind of safety bubble around them at all times. And because as you began, life is really hard. Life is hard. Life is complex for adolescents in all sorts of ways, but adult life is hard. You need to be equipped with resilience and courage and faith, and a deep intellect to move through life. So
one of the things I'm struck by is it's often the case that the soul never enters the conversation when it comes to child raising. It's about sports or the arts and about achievement and about getting to this, so that again we can go down the road of making a lot of money, gaining the whole world, so to speak. But of course, there's that passage that says, what does it mean that we gain the whole world but lose our lives? And I think what's really interesting to me about some of the work that you do is that it really is about cultivating the soul. And so what's interesting, Tad, was some things that you said recently about sort of the essential questions that we need to be having with our kids. And, in a culture of competition and cool, these are really interesting questions. So just imagine, and again, these are questions that you can ask your teenagers, but you can ask your adult kids as well, right? So first question, again, imagine having this conversation. How are you growing in grace, humility, and kindness? What? Did you get you got an A minus? How are you growing in grace, humility, and kindness? Number 2, how is your peer circle expanding? Or is it diminishing? Why should that matter? I mean, what if I just have my friends? What if my kids just have their friends and we're good? We're covered through high school. Why is that question important?
So the very concept of the families that we embody and the schools that we send our children to and all the community activities that they do, the purpose of all this is to cultivate a conversation with people who are different than we are. And the danger in adult peer relationships and college peer relationships and adolescent peer relationships is that peer relationships are either going to improve us and develop us or hold us back or keep us flat. So the idea of a school or a college or university and the diversity that these communities are composed of is that we don't self-segregate and we don't simply go to those with whom we feel most comfortable. We're constantly looking to expand because we're constantly looking to learn and listen and to develop a deeper and more profound understanding of the humanity that surrounds us. And we know that the data indicates in the country right now that we are not, as a country, doing this very well. We're self-segregating, we're polarizing, we're living in echo chambers. So the idea for high school and college students would be to make sure that their peer circles are constantly expanding and that they're asking larger questions about the meaning of their lives, the meanings of their communities by getting to know people who are very, very different than themselves. And once that stops, the learning and growth, personal growth of an adolescent or college student or adult stops.
Ask them how well they seek out others who view the world differently. Ask them, I love this one, how they experience kindness, concern, and empathy for their family. Whoa.
So my theory there is that if you buy in as a family to this engineering of the high school or college experience in order to worship the God of success, then you're basically telling your child that you're going to sacrifice all the obligations and responsibilities that they have in the family in service of the tutor or the SAT prep or the ACT prep. In other words, we're going to postpone your personal and family and societal involvement and responsibility until you get to here, and then you can start doing those really important things that this family believes in. It doesn't work. The students see right through it. They see that they're being engineered, they're being programmed, and then they stop believing in any of the things that we say about what our families, schools, or cultures are like. So they need to be allowed to do authentic work, and they actually need to be expected to do powerful work for their siblings, their parents, their grandparents, their schools, their communities, every day, non-negotiable. And then they do that same work in their schools and in their communities.
Elizabeth, ask them what they stand up for every day without fail. Ask them what they stand up for every day without fail. What do you hope kids will stand up for every day without fail?
I hope they will stand up for human rights and bridge those divides and be allies and that they recognize the humanity in everybody and respect that. And so it's about, I'm going to go back to just the whole notion of collaboration, because I think it's about creating partnerships with other people at all times. So it's about men and women, it's about different religious beliefs, sexual orientation, races, ethnicities. So that's what they should stand up for, without question.
Ask them about their role models. What if their role model is a YouTuber that likes to blow things up?
So I don't think that would probably be the case very often. I mean, I think and we've been studying the violence that we've seen in the United States over the last couple of weeks. We know that the internet is full of these voices of extreme hate on the left and on the right. So we know that those voices are out there, but I feel like the kids are not flocking to those social media sites and hate platforms early in their lives. They're going there much, much later, when all hope and all sense of human rights and human connection and human fellowship has been extinguished. And so the children that I know, and I think the children that you know all across the country, if you think about what Chip began with today, the baptism of a child, and you think about the fact that every child in the United States and in the world has this incredible innocence and this incredible love and this incredible belief in his or her family and his or her society. And I just feel like the role models that these children, adolescents, and college students and adults need to have are those that are representing love and service and generosity.
But what if they're not? What if, again, if we have this conversation with our child and our child says it's someone that's just sort of goofy, that doesn't seem to represent anything particularly meaningful? How do you approach that conversation?
I would just say, let's talk about someone to go with that goofy person. Let's talk about something. Let's talk about someone you studied in history or in literature, or let's talk about the person in this family that is heroic, or let's talk about the person in your class or in your community that you respect the most. Because I just feel like there are these role models everywhere. And sometimes we as parents or teachers need to explain why those people are role models, and to talk about these extraordinary human moments that emerge through the existence of these extraordinary people. And I guess the reason I'm so interested in that is I think those role models are being covered in the media but we could probably do a better job and a more intentional job of making sure that these voices are being heard and recognized.
Ask them, Elizabeth, to define what a healthy relationship is.
I think it goes back to a kind of mutual respect, always recognizing the humanity in someone else, never obviously objectifying, diminishing another human being. So a healthy relationship is one where there is a mutual respect and understanding of someone else's, that common humanity that we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. We're all trying the best that we can, and it doesn't. There's not judgment, and there is mutuality and a full and deep understanding of one another.
Ask them to be real, not virtual. Is that realistic?
Absolutely. If it's not, we're in a lot of trouble. The research is now clear. The screens are disrupting the adults' lives in this room. They're disrupting the experience of college, and they're decimating the experience of middle and high school kids. There's no longer any kind of theory surrounding this. This is a really dangerous and significant challenge for parents and schools if we're interested in the kind of rigor, focus, concentration, resilience that we have to be interested in the world. Not to mention the destruction of social media, of students' sense of self-esteem, and their ability to work in really powerful and healthy ways with one another in realistic day-to-day circumstances. So I think from the beginning, we all have to talk about it. We have to talk about it with adults first. What's our relationship with technology, and how is our relationship with technology sending a signal to our children or to our students about how important they are in our lives? That would be number one. And then number two is to really go to the students themselves and to ask them about their relationship with these devices and with social media, and have them begin to define what a more mature and responsible relationship would be. And then often simply breaking the habit of living virtually and opening books and opening conversations and being outdoors on a day like today.
One of the things that is consistent in all these questions is ask them. And what's interesting to me is that what you're really saying is that, what it seems to me you're saying is that really parenting wherever you are in the journey is about figuring out what the essential questions of life are and holding the space and holding your family to those questions. And I find that to be massively helpful. Like, I want to take these 10 questions and just keep going after them because, I do think parenting can be completely overwhelming. And there's so many different perspectives about what you should and shouldn't do and the like. And I wonder if that's what courageous parenting looks like in this day and age. It's saying, in effect, as Christians, we acknowledge the culture that we live in, that it's fast, that it's disruptive, that it's success-oriented, perfection-oriented, and we have to realize that we have to live in that, but we also have to bring the best of who we are, which is not always consistent with what other people want us to be. And what I love about this is that this is really an invitation to ask this question, not just one time, but many times, and to be able to say, so give me examples, with hopes that while maybe the first few times we ask these questions of our kids, they might sort of look at us like, why are you asking me this question? When they know that the questions are not going away, and then maybe they begin to go, okay, I'm gonna stay in this space with you, and I'm going to be able to come up with my own answers.
I think it's also an invitation to your children or to our students to take ownership of their own belief system, their own behavior, their own perspective on their life and others' lives. So it's a kind of belief in them, too, that they can do this kind of work, this kind of thinking. And when they begin to take ownership of that themselves, that is very empowering. And they begin to think and behave in different ways. So it's an invitation to parents to be courageous, and it's an invitation from parents to children to also be courageous in their lives and to do things that may seem countercultural, but that you are prioritizing the things that you want them to be thinking about and the ways that you want them to be behaving and treating other people, and whatever that journey is in their life, they're going to continue to think about those questions. You're just sort of they will internalize those and begin to ask themselves that as adults as well.
I want to ask sort of one more big question, which is really about what this initiative is about, which is faith and courage. And courage really is about the commitment to enter into the great challenges of the day. I think a big risk and an often practice that we have when some of the big questions come up, like the KKK rally in Charlottesville or the shooting, just recently at the Tree of Life Synagogue, and other different events. What I guess what I'm struck by is that it might be easy just to sort of brush that or try to push that under the rug, with the idea that I don't want to disturb my kid because they're busy getting tutoring, right? Or they're busy sort of in their engineered life, and I want to protect them from all of the problems of the world. So I'm not really going to talk about it. I don't want to upset them. And really, we're putting our kids at a great disadvantage. We're essentially taking away the capacity to cultivate courage by not dealing with that. And so I want to just ask you how you have dealt with these questions. And I know that you made a pilgrimage down to Montgomery, and you had Brian Stevenson that came to school. Why have you chosen? It would be easy at a boarding school in Delaware on a beautiful campus to say, we're just going to ignore all this and kind of create this bucolic, safe space where nobody has to worry about anything. Why is that not the approach that we should take as parents?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that whether you look at the history of lynching that Brian Stevenson's work has displayed in Montgomery, or if you look at the anti-Semitic hatred as expressed in the shooting in Pittsburgh and as demonstrated by an increase in anti-Semitic words and attitudes across the country, or if you look at the shooting by a white supremacist in Charleston, you understand the stakes of human rights, kindness, and grace in America and in the world today. So I'm always eager to make sure that everyone knows how difficult and how hard and how disciplined you have to be as a family or as a school to create a culture of kindness and grace. It does sound, as Chip said earlier, it sounds very soft. It's really hard to do. It takes everything in your heart and soul to create that kind of culture. But look at the results if it doesn't exist. Look at the gap that exists in our country today if we spend all our time demonizing the other and all the time moving away in this vast polarity that characterizes our political life. We're leaving a gap open for groups that are so eager to fill the gap. They're so eager to tell their particular truth and to spread this scourge of hatred and intolerance in a land that was finished with it years and years ago. So what Stevenson has been saying so powerfully, and he's my role model, he's my hero in my life, is he's been saying that we need to look very, very carefully at what exactly happened and what the legacy of white supremacy was in this country in order for us to move forward. And so for working with students and adolescents, they, as I said earlier, they crave the responsibility of active scholarship and engagement. They don't want to play games. They don't want to be in an engineered environment. They want to be taken seriously. They want their voices to be taken seriously. The students from Parkland hit the road last year. They represented an entire generation of students. They weren't political. They weren't saying we are on the right or on the left. They were saying we just want to go to school and be safe. Can you as adults take care of that for us? And they looked out at the adult community and they said, apparently not. So we're going to do it ourselves. And that's what I'm feeling in this generation. Are we going to take care of this divide? Are we going to take care of what pulls us apart? Or are we, now speaking for the kids, are we going to do this now? And I'm telling you right now, they're ready to do this work if we allow them to do it. They're going to be so much healthier if we allow them to do it. And if we can take all the pollution that's in the air that's trying to diminish their high school and college experience and give them real work to do in America and the world, they will flourish and do remarkable things. So it's really all on us. It's all on us as adults whether or not we're going to give them the kind of opportunity and responsibility that they deserve.
Which is, again, not protecting them.
No.
It's about really exposing and exploring and saying, how does this speak to your life?
The irony is, if you protect them, if you spend all your days trying to protect them and shield them and engineer them, their lives are going to be ruined. They're going to be empty. They're going to be as empty as you feel when you're trying to engineer the life of a child. The entire impetus of a school or of a parent should be to create this incredible independence, freedom, autonomy, and energy into the world. And I don't think we're doing a great job as a nation on that front.
So,
the fact of the matter is you can't protect them anyway. I mean, life happens. And we were part of a really emotional day yesterday when one of our students who was killed in a plane crash this summer, the memorial service, and our students were amazing. They had to deal with something that was really tragic and just beyond what they ever thought they were going to have to deal with as 22-year-olds. Life is unfair. So you can't protect them, you have to get them ready. And they have to have the ability to embrace one another and gain strength from one another and move forward with each other. So I was so inspired by them yesterday. I don't know how they did what they did. So ultimately you can't protect them. Mm-hmm. And I have to give a shout out to our son who's running in the marathon, New York Marathon today. And he's running it for his friend, his college roommate, who was traveling Peru last year and went missing and has never been found. So he had to find a way to honor his friend. And to do that, he decided to run with the Movember organization, because this was his friend's organization, and to run the marathon and to train. He'd never run one before, and to do it for him. It was his way of pushing through something that was tragic and horrible. And he's gotten so much support from his friends, and he's got the strength and the resilience and courage to do that.
Wow.
So that's what we need to get the kids ready for. And they can do remarkable things. They are amazing. They give me strength and inspiration every single day.
So give us a faith and courage challenge as we walk out this door, as we think about these stories of children whose hearts have been broken, who have cultivated these stronger, more courageous hearts. Give us a faith and courage challenge for something as parents that we can do, or something as families that we can do.
So I think my only recommendation would be sit down with your child, find out what he or she feels most passionately about in terms of this church, this community, this city, this country, and challenge him or her to make a difference and to commit to the issue that she is most interested in a very powerful and authentic way, and support her in that endeavor. And let it be hers, and let it be an expression of her idealism and passion for the humanity of this community. And watch what happens to her. It'll be amazing.
The holidays present all kinds of opportunities for that. Well, I want to thank you all so very much for coming down here and spending time with us and offering these treasures of wisdom. And again, I want to say this prayer, a prayer for young persons, because I think after this conversation, it holds even greater meaning. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. God, our Father, you see your children growing up in an unsteady and confusing world. Show them that your ways give more life than the ways of the world, and that following you is better than chasing after selfish goals. Help them to take failure not as a measure of their worth, but as a chance for a new start, and give them strength to hold their faith in you and to keep alive their joy in your creation. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all so much
you.
for being here.
Thank you.